One bed, 3 dice, and a choice no man should make. Paths of Glory didn't just show war. It ripped the metal off its chest and exposed the rot underneath. A director barely 30 years old. A star who risked everything. And a film so dangerous, an entire country banned it for 2 decades. These are 20 weird facts about Paths of Glory. And the bonus? A love story that started with a German song and ended with Stanley Kubrick's marriage. Fix bayonets. This one cuts deep. Stanley Kubrick wasn't supposed to make this movie. At 28 years old, he was a nobody in Hollywood. A photographer turned indie filmmaker with exactly 2 features under his belt, both barely seen, both barely profitable. Kirk Douglas didn't know him, the studios didn't want him, and when the script for Paths of Glory landed on desks across Los Angeles, every established director passed. Too depressing, they said. Too anti-war, too French, too intellectual. No love story, no happy ending, no heroes riding off into the sunset. Just 3 men facing a firing squad for a crime they didn't commit. It was box office poison. But Kubrick saw something else. He saw truth. He'd read Humphrey Cobb's novel years earlier and never forgot it. The story haunted him. When Kirk Douglas finally agreed to star, he had one condition. He wanted a director he could control, someone young, someone hungry. Douglas thought Kubrick would be easy to manage. He was wrong. From day one, Kubrick fought for every frame, every angle, every moral choice that made executives uncomfortable. And in the process, he made a film Hollywood didn't want, but cinema couldn't ignore. Kirk Douglas didn't just star in Paths of Glory. He saved it. The project was dead. Multiple studios had rejected it. Producers called it uncommercial suicide. Then Douglas read the script. He was at the peak of his career, fresh off massive hits like Lust for Life and Gunfight at the OK. Corral. He could have done anything, made millions on another Western or epic. Instead, he chose this. A black and white war film with no action, no romance, and an ending that left audiences devastated. His agent begged him not to do it. The studio offered him triple the money to walk away. But Douglas had served in World War II. He knew what combat looked like. He knew what officers did to their own men when power went unchecked. So, he fought. He put up his own money. He used his star power as leverage. He told United Artists that if they didn't finance Paths of Glory, he'd walk from his 3-picture deal. They blinked. Kubrick got his film, and Douglas got something more valuable than a paycheck. He got a legacy. Years later, he said it was the film he was most proud of, not because it made money, but because it mattered. The novel sat unread for over 20 years. Humphrey Cobb wrote Paths of Glory in 1935, a brutal anti-war story based loosely on real French military executions during World War I. The book detailed how 4 soldiers were randomly selected and shot by their own army to cover up a failed offensive, courts-martial that lasted minutes, generals who cared more about reputation than truth, executions designed to restore discipline through terror. When it was published, critics praised it. They called it unflinching, devastating, necessary. Readers ignored it. It sold poorly, faded fast, and disappeared into obscurity. By the 1950s, most people had never heard of it. Bookstores didn't stock it. Libraries barely kept it on shelves. It became a footnote, a forgotten piece of anti-war literature in a world that was already preparing for the next conflict. But Kubrick had. He'd stumbled across a copy in a used bookstore in New York, pulled it off a dusty shelf because the title intrigued him. He read it in one sitting. He couldn't shake it. The injustice, the bureaucracy, the casual cruelty of men in power sending others to die. It felt urgent, even decades later. The story hadn't aged because the truth it told never changed. So, he tracked down Cobb, bought the rights for almost nothing, maybe a few $100s, and started adapting it with screenwriter Calder Willingham. They worked together for months, translating Cobb's rage onto the page. Cobb never lived to see the film. He died in 1944, more than a decade before production began. He never knew his forgotten novel would become a masterpiece. But his words, his rage, his refusal to look away from the ugliness of war, those stayed. Kubrick inherited them. and he made sure they hit the screen exactly as hard as they had hit the page. The trench scenes almost killed the production. Kubrick wanted realism, not Hollywood trenches with clean walls and dramatic lighting. Real trenches, muddy, claustrophobic, hell on earth. So, the crew dug them, by hand. In a field outside Munich, Germany, they carved hundreds of yards of narrow corridors into the dirt, reinforced them with wood, filled them with water, smoke, and debris. The actors had to crawl through them, fight through them, film scene after scene covered in filth, and it was freezing. Germany in winter, early mornings, mud that never dried. The crew got sick, equipment broke, cameras jammed from the moisture. But Kubrick didn't care. He kept shooting. He used a custom-built dolly on tracks to create his signature tracking shots, following soldiers as they moved through the trenches in long, unbroken takes. It looked incredible. It felt real, and it nearly destroyed everyone involved. Kirk Douglas later said those trench scenes were some of the most physically demanding work he'd ever done. Not because of action, but because of cold, mud, and Kubrick's refusal to stop until it was perfect. The chateau wasn't a set, it was the real thing. Most directors would have built a fake French palace on a soundstage, painted backdrops and plaster columns made to look expensive. Not Kubrick. He found an actual 18th century Bavarian chateau, Schleißheim Palace near Munich, and shot there. The marble floors, the grand staircases, the towering windows, all real. No studio trickery, no shortcuts, no compromise. And it changed everything. The actors moved differently. Kirk Douglas's footsteps echoed through those halls with genuine weight, each step reminding you these were rooms built for royalty. When General Miro strolls through the palace discussing the deaths of his own men, the opulence isn't fake. It's mocking. It's obscene. The crystal chandeliers, the gilded frames, the polished floors reflecting centuries of power. Kubrick used the space to show the distance between the generals and the soldiers. While men died in frozen trenches, clawing through mud, officers danced in crystal-lit ballrooms, sipping champagne. The chateau became a character, cold, beautiful, and utterly indifferent to suffering. Kubrick shot there for weeks, using natural light whenever possible, letting the sun pour through those massive windows. He wanted the contrast to burn, mud and marble, blood and champagne, death and decoration. And in a palace that had survived centuries of European wars, housed kings and generals and men who sent others to die, he captured the one truth those walls could never escape. The people who start wars are never the ones who die in them. George Macready's scar was real, and it was perfect. He played General Moreau, the aristocratic officer who orders the execution of his own men to cover his failures. On screen, Macready's face carried a distinctive scar running down his right cheek. It wasn't makeup, it was a real injury from a car accident years earlier. Kubrick noticed it during casting and refused to hide it. He wanted it visible, prominent, permanent, because it made Moreau look like exactly what he was. A man who'd survived violence but learned nothing from it. Someone who wore his wounds like decorations. Macready didn't flinch from the choice. He leaned into the coldness, the vanity, the casual cruelty. He delivered lines about sending men to certain death with the same tone you'd use to order wine. And that scar, that mark of survival, made it worse. It reminded you that men like Moreau live through wars. They just make sure other people do the dying. In a film full of moral scars, his was the only one you could see, and somehow, that made it the most honest thing on screen.
They're not advancing! The barrage is getting away from...
Timothy Carey was impossible. He played Private Farrell, one of the 3 soldiers chosen for execution. And from day one, he drove everyone insane. Carey was a method actor before method acting had a name. He showed up to set in character, stayed in character between takes, and refused to break even during lunch. Ooh, he ate alone, muttering to himself, treating the crew like they weren't there. He argued with Kubrick constantly, challenging every direction, every camera angle, every line reading. He rewrote his own dialogue without permission, throwing in words that weren't in the script. He ad-libbed reactions that caught other actors off guard, changed blocking mid-scene, and once pretended to actually faint during a rehearsal just to see how people would react. The medics rushed over. Carey sat up laughing. Kirk Douglas wanted him fired immediately. The crew called him unbearable, a nightmare, a liability. But Kubrick kept him. Not because he liked him, he didn't, but because Carey's unpredictability made everyone else sharper, more alert, more real. You never knew what he'd do next, and that tension bled into the performances. On screen, Carey is terrifying, wild-eyed, broken, a man who's already accepted he's dead. It's one of the most unsettling performances in the film, and it came from an actor who made everyone around him absolutely miserable. Years later, Kubrick admitted Carey was right. The chaos worked, the fear was real, and sometimes the worst people to work with give you the best results. The execution scene was filmed in one take, 3 men tied to posts, a firing squad, a drum roll, and silence. It's the most devastating moment in the film, and Kubrick shot it without cuts. No coverage, no safety net, no second chances. The actors had to hit their marks perfectly. The soldiers had to march in sync. The camera had to glide without a single bump, and everyone had to hold the emotion for over 2 minutes straight. One mistake, and they'd have to reset everything. The lighting, the extras, the blocking, but they didn't. They nailed it. First try. Kirk Douglas watched from off camera, and he said later that the set was completely silent afterward. No one spoke. The crew just stood there. Because what they'd just filmed wasn't acting anymore. It was a memorial. Kubrick knew it too. He didn't ask for another take. He didn't adjust anything. He just moved on. Because some moments are so perfect, so true, that trying again would be an insult. The execution in Paths of Glory looks like a documentary, because for 2 minutes, it was. France banned the film for 18 years. Not because it was violent, because it was honest. Paths of Glory depicted French military officers as vain, cowardly, and willing to murder their own soldiers to protect their reputations. The French government saw it as a national insult. They pressured theaters, leaned on distributors, and made sure the film never screened in France. Not in Paris, not in the countryside, not anywhere. French critics who'd seen it abroad called it a masterpiece. French veterans quietly agreed with its message, but the government didn't care. They kept it locked out until 1975, nearly 2 decades after its release. And even then, it wasn't a grand reopening. It slipped into theaters quietly, almost apologetically. But by that point, Kubrick was already a legend, and the film's reputation had only grown. The ban didn't kill it. It made it mythical, because nothing makes people want to see something more than being told they can't. And when French audiences finally watched Paths of Glory, they understood why their government had been so afraid. It wasn't anti-French, it was anti-power, and that terrified everyone in charge. The German crew didn't speak English, Kubrick didn't speak German, and somehow it worked. The film was shot entirely in Germany with a local crew, electricians, grips, camera assistants. None of them understood a word Kubrick was saying. He had to communicate through a translator, every single direction filtered through another person. It should have been a disaster, but Kubrick adapted. He started drawing diagrams. He used hand signals. He showed the crew exactly what he wanted by physically moving equipment himself. And slowly, they learned his visual language. By the end of production, they didn't need the translator. They could read his gestures, his glances, his silences. Kirk Douglas later joked that Kubrick directed the entire movie like a silent film. No long speeches, no actors' workshop discussions, just precision, just images. And in a strange way, the language barrier made Kubrick better. It forced him to think visually, to trust the frame over dialogue. That discipline, that obsession with composition, it became his trademark. And it started here, in a freezing German field, with a director who couldn't ask for what he wanted, so he just showed them instead. The battle sequence lasted 30 seconds on screen. It took 3 weeks to film. Kubrick choreographed it like a nightmare ballet. Explosions, smoke, bodies flying through the air, men scrambling over corpses. He wanted it to feel chaotic, but look controlled. Every blast was timed to the second. Every extra knew exactly when to fall, where to land, how to react. They rehearsed for days before a single camera rolled, and when it finally came time to shoot, Kubrick used every trick he knew. Multiple cameras, overlapping takes, pyrotechnics rigged by experts who'd worked on actual war films. But nothing prepared the actors for the noise. The explosions weren't movie magic. They were real charges buried in the ground, detonating one after another in sequence. Kirk Douglas said you couldn't hear yourself think. The concussive force knocked men off their feet. Dust and debris rained down for minutes after each blast. And through it all, Kubrick kept rolling, capturing genuine terror on the faces of extras who weren't acting anymore. They were surviving. When the sequence was finally edited together, it became one of the most visceral depictions of World War I combat ever filmed. No heroics, no glory, just mud, smoke, and men dying for 100 yards of worthless ground. 30 seconds that took 3 weeks, and every frame earned. Adolphe Menjou played General Brulard, and he hated everything about the film. A veteran actor with decades of experience, Menjou was a staunch conservative, a proud anti-communist, and a man who believed in military honor above all else. When he read the script for Paths of Glory, he was disgusted. He thought it was propaganda, an attack on the military, a dangerous piece of anti-war activism. But he needed the paycheck, so he took the role and spent the entire shoot arguing with Kubrick and Kirk Douglas about the film's message. He tried to soften his character, to add moments of sympathy or regret. Kubrick refused. He wanted Brulard cold, calculating, a man who saw soldiers as expendable tools. Between takes, Menjou would corner Douglas and rant about the damage this film would do to America's image. Douglas would smile and walk away. But the tension worked. On screen, Menjou's Brulard is chilling precisely because the actor brought his own rigid worldview to the role. He wasn't acting. He genuinely believed in the military hierarchy, in the necessity of sacrificing men for strategy. And that belief made him terrifying, because the scariest villains are the ones who don't think they're villains at all. The script was written in 2 weeks. Kubrick and co-writer Jim Thompson locked themselves in a room with Humphrey Cobb's novel and didn't come out until they had a screenplay. Thompson was a crime novelist, known for dark, violent stories about desperate men. He understood cruelty, betrayal, systems that chewed people up. He and Kubrick barely slept. They argued over every scene, every line, every moral choice. Thompson wanted it darker. Kubrick wanted it precise. They compromised by making it both. The dialogue was sharp, economical, brutal. No wasted words, no speeches that didn't land like punches. When they emerged, they had a script that was barely 90 pages, short, tight, merciless. Kirk Douglas read it in one sitting and immediately called his agent. He wanted in, even though he knew it would never be a hit, because some scripts don't need to make money. They just need to exist. Thompson walked away from the project before filming began, frustrated with studio interference and Kubrick's obsessive control. But his fingerprints remained. The cold efficiency, the moral ambiguity, the sense that everyone was trapped in a machine they couldn't stop. That was Thompson. And it made Paths of Glory feel less like a movie and more like a verdict. Kirk Douglas did his own stunts in the trenches. No doubles, no safety wires, no insurance company hovering nervously. He crawled through mud, dodged explosions, ran through smoke-filled corridors while debris rained down around him. At 41 years old, he could have easily handed it off to a stunt performer. But he refused. He said if the soldiers in the film were suffering, he should suffer too. Kubrick didn't ask him to do it. Douglas volunteered, and it cost him. He injured his back during one of the trench runs, a sharp pain that stayed with him for weeks. He sprained his ankle climbing over debris. He caught a respiratory infection from the cold German weather and kept filming through fevers. The crew begged him to slow down. He ignored them. Because Douglas understood something fundamental about this film. It wasn't entertainment, it was testimony, and testimony required sacrifice. When you watch him move through those trenches, you're not seeing an actor pretending. You're seeing a man pushing himself to the edge because he believed the story mattered more than his comfort. That commitment shows in every frame. There's no movie star vanity, no heroic posing. just exhaustion, determination, and a refusal to let the camera look away. The dinner scene was unscripted. Well, mostly. Kubrick had the basic outline written, 3 generals discussing the execution over champagne and roasted duck, but he wanted it to feel natural, conversational, like these men did this every night, so he told the actors to improvise. George Macready, Adolphe Menjou, and Richard Anderson sat at that table and just talked. They discussed strategy, reputation, politics, all while servants poured wine and served food. Kubrick let the camera roll for nearly 20 minutes straight. Most of it was unusable, too rambling, too unfocused. But buried in that improvisation was gold. Moments where the generals casually dismissed human life, where they laughed about things that should have horrified them, where they revealed their complete disconnection from the war they were orchestrating. Kubrick cut it down to 3 minutes. The most damning 3 minutes in the film. No music, no dramatic lighting, just men eating dinner and sentencing others to death without missing a bite. It's quietly monstrous. And it happened because Kubrick trusted his actors enough to let them find the evil themselves. They didn't need a script to tell them how power corrupts. They just needed permission to show it.
There's the question of the troops' morale, don't forget that.
The troops' morale, sir?
Certainly. These executions will be a pretty tonic for the entire division.
The film's budget was impossibly small. Just under $1 million for the entire production. For context, other major releases in 1957 cost 5 to 10 times that amount. But Kubrick was used to working lean. He had made his previous films with pocket change and borrowed equipment. So he stretched every dollar. He shot in Germany because it was cheaper than Hollywood. He used local crews at lower rates. He limited locations to just 3 main sets: the trenches, the chateau, and the prison. He shot in black and white because color would have doubled the budget, and he refused to waste film. Every take had to matter. Every setup had to serve the story. Kirk Douglas later joked that Kubrick ran the production like a military operation, ironically fitting for a film about military incompetence. But that discipline paid off. Paths of Glory looks like it cost millions. The scale, the production design, the cinematography, all of it feels grand, epic, expensive. And it was made for less than most studios spent on marketing. It proved something Kubrick would carry through his entire career. You don't need money to make great cinema. You just need vision, control, and a refusal to compromise. The courtroom scene was shot in one day. One location, 7 pages of dialogue, dozens of extras, and a camera that had to capture every angle without mistakes. Kubrick mapped it out like a chess match. He knew exactly where every actor would stand, where every light would hit, how every line would be framed. The actors rehearsed for a week before the cameras rolled. By the time they stepped onto set, they had the blocking memorized, the rhythms internalized. And then Kubrick pushed them harder. He wanted the trial to feel rushed, unfair, predetermined. So he kept the pace brutal. Defense attorney Dax, played by Kirk Douglas, barely has time to present evidence before he's cut off. The judges have already made their decision. The whole proceeding is theater, a charade designed to look like justice while delivering murder. And filming it in one compressed day heightened that urgency. The actors were tired, frustrated, running on adrenaline. Perfect for a scene about exhausted men fighting a system designed to destroy them. When Douglas delivers his final speech, you can hear the fatigue in his voice. It's not acting. It's a man who's been fighting all day and knows he's already lost. That weariness makes the scene devastating. Because injustice isn't dramatic. It's just bureaucracy with a body count. Kubrick feuded with the studio over the ending. United Artists wanted hope, a last-minute pardon, a general's change of heart, something to soften the blow. Kubrick refused. He said the ending was the point. 3 men die for nothing. Justice fails. Power wins. That's the truth, and he wouldn't compromise it for ticket sales. The studio threatened to recut the film without him. Kubrick threatened to have his name removed and torpedo the release. Kirk Douglas stepped in as mediator and ultimately sided with Kubrick. He told the studio, "If you change the ending, you destroy the film." They backed down, but barely. The theatrical release kept Kubrick's ending intact. 3 soldiers executed. Their commanding officer transferred to a comfortable desk job. The system continuing unchanged. Audiences walked out of theaters in silence. Some were angry, many were devastated. A few wrote letters demanding their money back, but no one forgot it. That ending burned itself into film history because it refused to lie. War isn't noble. Justice isn't guaranteed. And sometimes the only victory is telling the truth, even when the truth offers no comfort at all. The film bombed at the box office. Despite Kirk Douglas's star power, despite critical praise, despite everything Kubrick poured into it, Paths of Glory barely made its money back. American audiences in 1957 didn't want to see a film about military injustice. They wanted spectacle, romance, heroes. This gave them none of that. It gave them mud, bureaucracy, and a firing squad. So they stayed home. The studio shrugged and moved on. Kirk Douglas took a financial hit. And Kubrick, still just 29 years old, watched his masterpiece disappear into obscurity. But he didn't panic. He knew what he'd made. And slowly, quietly, the film found its audience. Film schools started teaching it, critics revisited it. Young filmmakers studied it frame by frame, trying to understand how Kubrick made every shot feel inevitable. By the 1960s, it was a cult classic. By the 1970s, it was considered one of the greatest anti-war films ever made. By the time Kubrick died in 1999, Paths of Glory had outlived every film that beat it at the box office that year. Because popularity fades, but truth lasts. And Kubrick bet everything on truth. The cast and crew expected it to change Hollywood. They thought a film this powerful, this uncompromising, would force the industry to take risks, to tell harder stories, to stop sugarcoating war. It didn't. Hollywood kept making the same movies, the same heroes, the same victories, the same lies. Paths of Glory became an outlier, admired but not imitated. Studios learned the wrong lesson. They saw the box office numbers and decided anti-war films didn't sell. It would be years before another major Hollywood production dared to show war as ugly, meaningless, bureaucratic. Kubrick himself moved on, but he carried the lessons with him. The control he demanded on Paths of Glory, the refusal to compromise, the obsession with every detail, that became his template. Every film after, from Spartacus to 2001 to Full Metal Jacket, bore the marks of what he learned in those German trenches. Paths of Glory didn't change Hollywood, but it changed Kubrick. And through him, it changed cinema. Because one perfect film, even a commercial failure, can teach a generation of filmmakers what's possible when you refuse to blink. The final scene wasn't in the script. Kubrick added it days before filming wrapped. A German girl, captured and frightened, forced to sing for French soldiers in a tavern. The men jeer and laugh until she starts singing, then silence, then tears. The actress was Christiane Harlan, a young German performer Kubrick had spotted in a play. She sang The Faithful Hussar, a German folk song about a dying soldier. She was terrified, barely spoke English, had no film experience. Kubrick told her to just sing and let the emotion come. She did, and she was heartbreaking. The soldiers in the scene, hardened extras who'd been playing troops for weeks, several of them started crying for real. Kubrick kept the cameras rolling. He knew he'd captured something true, something beyond the script. A moment where soldiers remembered they were human, where enemies became people, where war paused just long enough to let grief through. It's the last scene in the film, and it's devastating because it's the only moment of genuine tenderness in 90 minutes of cruelty. And it changed Kubrick's life. He fell in love with Christiane Harlan during that shoot. They married a year later and stayed together until his death in 1999, over 40 years. The scene that saved the film's soul also gave Kubrick his.